Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recollection Step, a Grand Archive TCG podcast, part of the Maindeck podcast family. I'm Dan.
And I'm Taylor. And we are kind of like right in the thick of MRC now. It's been some really good stuff. Dan, I guess I was going to ask you how your cases treated you, but you streamed that for everybody to see. So most people know that they treated you fairly well. Mine treated me fairly well as well. Wait, I can't remember now. You've been showing some of the CSRs that you've been buying. I don't remember what you hit in your case.
I
hit a Ravaging Finale CSR.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So that was a sweet one to buy. It's a lot of fun to play with, by the way, as well. We'll get into that later. Let's see. I hit 2 Cerulean Decree foils in my cases as well. So that was pretty sick.
You have been, so we've just in general, we've been exploring the metagame.
Yep.
We have been throwing out tons of deck lists, putting them together, and generally being pretty impressed, I would say, with the playability of a lot of strategies that didn't feel like they were quite as playable before. We have people in our meta who are we still have some we have like Wind Allies running around a little bit. We've had some Fire Xander decks stuff. We've had decks that have been previously pretty effective. And I don't know if we've had a list so far that has felt like, this isn't a thing.
Yeah. It definitely feels like most archetypes have the pieces they need to feel like they are coherent, right? Like a lot of the self-mill stuff is really kind of starting to come around. So a lot of players can play with that in filling up their graveyard for value. Nico, we'll get into that later. Just really got a lot of pieces as well. So I think she's going to be floating around the fringes of playable plus. And then a lot of really good wind tools, a lot of really good fire tools. There's a lot of tools to kind of just fight against different strategies now too. So just a ton of different answers for things as well. Overall MRC has just been really, really good addition to the metagame. So kind of jumping into that, Dan, what have been some of your favorite cards so far from MRC? Before we kind of get into I guess let me lead in a little bit. So for listeners, this episode, we're going to just kind of dive into the MRC metagame, some of the new decks that we've been looking at, what's cool, what's not cool. Well, actually, we won't be talking about what's not cool because it's not cool. So why would you talk about
Lame.
it? Exactly. But focusing a lot more on the stuff that MRC has really enabled that really was either really beloved in previous formats but not playable, or stuff that's just kind of almost completely new now. So yeah, once we'll kind of go through here just some of our favorite cards, and then we'll get into kind of some of these more deep dives into the cool new decks that we've all been trying out. So okay. Dan, sorry, now you can answer, please.
Thank you. That was great. Cards? We need a little lead in there, so it's not just a rambling podcast.
Yep.
So if you look at my deck profiles, if you watch my deck profiles, the ones that have released so far and the ones that will be coming in the future, I think my goal is to have 2 deck profiles up next week, covering some non-Silvie decks that we've been playing. But a lot of water is involved in there. So if you look at just all the deck profiles releasing, you're going to see a trend in a few things that we identified very quickly as things that are, if not, well, actually, I think they're quite competitive, but not only are they competitive, they're just sweet. They're really, really, really cool cards. So my favorite card has to be Silvie level 3. It's maybe feels like a cop out a little bit to me, but holy cow, the entire package that deck brings has been so fun in every iteration, so competitive, able to just keep up, able to throw down with anyone. We have a number of people trying out Tristan builds. I haven't lost a match to Tristan yet in Constructed. So that's been pretty sweet. Um, and we've like Taylor said, we have a good Nico build. We've been testing. That was the only draw that I took. I think, and we talked about Taylor. You and I talked about that match a little bit afterwards, and recognized that in game 2, I think I got a little. I left my defensive stance playing Win Silvie, and that was a mistake. And I might have just been able to like hold the fort down if I hadn't done that. Despite that, game 3 went to time, and it was Silvie favored at the time. So I didn't feel bad about that.
That was you were playing Nico in that matchup, right?
No, I was playing Silvie. This was last week.
Last week. Oh yeah. I was on Nico. Yes. Okay. Yep. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I've had Wind Allies. I talked about this in the deck profile, but that was the game where I brought in the Bestial Frenzies, and Bestial Frenzy to 6 power Vampiric, 5 power Vampiric Slime, which then became 6 power on a 5 ally board, cleaving. It would just heal 36, and it was just like I think that will go for a long time.
Eat your heart out, Carter.
Disgusting. Yeah, it was Carter's lame compared to this. It was wild. So yeah, I've had so much fun playing various iterations of Silvie. It's been super, super fun. I think the slimes are such a powerful package. And then the other card I want to mention, which is one I'm sure you're going to talk about plenty. There's a ton to explore. So this is very, very bare minimum. And maybe I'll think of some other things later. But just I was so happy that our spoiler card, Primordial Ritual, has been like really good. Like I think really quite a workhorse card. And pretty much every water deck I build right now, I go, okay, Spirit of Water for Primordial Ritual. We can figure out the rest afterwards.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Same here. Primordial Ritual is definitely up there with my favorite cards from MRC so far. It is a little trickier to play than I thought it was going to be. Like I was thinking it was going to be closer to just a water cremation ritual. That's not necessarily the case, because you don't go back up in hand size. Like you're going down in hand size to play it. So it's not as straight gas as cremation ritual, but it's still incredibly good for decks that either are like leveling a lot or just have a lot of material deck cards that cost 1 or more. So it's been very good still. It's just it takes a little bit more thought than cremation ritual to play, which kind of makes sense. I mean, like that's kind of how water has been throughout the game as well. Just like you need a little bit more planning and forethought, or that's not really necessarily fair either. You just don't get the rewards right away. Yeah. And so you have to think about it a little bit more.
The big thing about Primordial Ritual is cremation ritual is an instant gratification of cards in hand. Primordial Ritual is, I mean, assuming you're going to mill at least 1 floating memory or some other type of effect that works from the yard as well. There are a couple now that are kind of cool, but assuming you're going to hit like at least 1 floating memory, let's just make it simple that way. When you play that ritual, you're really kind of just setting up to not lose value on a future turn. So it's very much like it's a longer game payoff type of thing. And the big advantage of the card is the fast speed, where you're able to use it on something that you were potentially going to lose anyway. That kind of does its job and then goes there, and then you just go, well, incidentally, I'll also mill a couple of cards. And as long as you kind of hit 1 floating memory there, that is sort of the +1 that cremation ritual was trying to get you. But you just don't get it right now. You get it a little later when you go to level or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. So been playing with that. I like that a lot. Lost in Thought is insane as well.
Okay. I feel so bad. I underrated that card immediately. When that card was revealed, I saw it was like, well, X draw spell, like whatever, like, this, who cares? Yeah. Oh man, that card has been so nuts.
The card has been nutty. Even just like you play it for X=2 and draw 2. That's bonkers. You just cycle it for 0, don't draw anything, and just getting the guaranteed floating memory is useful. It's not like good, but it's definitely like a valid use case that comes up pretty often. And then when you get to play it for X=2, like it's just insane. It absolutely bonkers. Even just cycling itself, X=1 is fine. Like it's so versatile. It's so flexible. and it does it all at fast speed as well. It's so much fun to play. You just drop a ton of cards again, and like I don't know how people can't love that. Like it's insane.
The big thing about this and Primordial Ritual is that both of them are requiring that you build your deck with a particular focus on floating memory to be able to get the, actually get value out of these cards. Water has a good amount. I mean, that's really the identity that I think is that Water's leaning into in MRC.
Yes.
It was like its identity kind of before, but it's got like reasonable payoffs now. Like without Lost in Thought, the floating memory. The thing is, the cost to all this is these floating memory cards. Well, if Water has lots of options, they really lock you into a certain kind of composition in your deck. There are certain cards, things like Chilling Touch or whatever, that you're going to be inclined to put in. And don't get me wrong, I've had some killer Chilling Touches. Like it's especially against like Rye decks, just like, yeah, you're not leveling next turn, you better find something else to do now.
Yeah.
That's like, that can be great. But I've also had some Chilling Touches that have been very, very mediocre, and that's just the nature of that card. And so you put a bunch of cards in your deck that like they're going to be kind of like that. It's like sometimes Fracturize is nuts, sometimes it's very mediocre, sometimes Chilling Touch is nuts, sometimes it's mediocre. So you're not playing all these just like straight bangers in your deck, but now we actually have this payoff. It's like, okay, I'm going to play some of those, and then I'm just going to draw 3 at the end of your turn for fun, and then get the floating memory back. And that is for like in this Nico deck that we're going to show next week. That has been like, that's felt very, very good.
Yeah, it's anytime you get to draw 2 or more cards with it, it's so bonkers. Like you feel so far ahead at that point. It's dope. But by far my favorite card has been Cerulean Decree. That card has
it's been so good, dude.
So much.
Holy cow.
Like, you even just playing it, if you don't imbue it, it's gonna be fine. Like it's gonna be worth the card. When you get to imbue it and do 2 things, like usually just having it replace itself by drawing a card, it's insane. It just the amount of tempo you get from that is just astronomical. And as long as you're not like just super behind on board when you play it, like it puts you ahead by quite a bit.
Yeah, that card has been pretty potent for sure. The big thing is that like I've tried building. I've been looking at some like Water decks that go to advanced elements and everything, and it starts to feel a little dicey.
It's a little like you're not always guaranteed the imbue. Thankfully, for the most part, like a Frostbind that costs 3 is still playable. Like you play things like Song of Frost, which kind of mimic the -3 power for target units attacks that turn. Like it's still playable when you don't imbue it. So like it helps a lot in those level 3 decks where they're going to be playing more advanced element cards and potentially more normal cards than like some of the straight Water decks will. That it's still it's fine in that if you don't get to imbue it and draw the extra card, it's still like super strong and can definitely impact the game. So you'll notice I didn't include like any fire or wind cards or anything in my list of favorite cards.
Why is that, Taylor?
I've only been playing Water. I'm gonna get to fire. Actually, I'm really excited to try out some Merlin builds. Like as tired of Merlin as people are, I think Retold Fortunes is going to be insane for Merlin.
Retold Fortunes seems really good.
Yeah. So I'm excited to play around with that. There's like, I really like Andronica. I think that's going to enable some Sweet Lorraine builds that I'm really excited to try out. So I'll be getting to those. But I've only played with the Water cards so far. So
yeah, I wanted to ask also, are there any other cards that you like? You mentioned Retold Fortune and Andronica. Anything else you want to mention that you are looking forward still? As we're, like I said, we're literally, we're just like everyone. We're just experiencing this set right now. But this set had such a short spoiler season. And by spoiler season, I mean one night at Worlds when they just launched the majority of the set in front of everyone. So we haven't had the time that like we would in a previous set to have like kind of isolated which builds we like. So we're just screwing around. Like, okay, well, what's the next thing to try? So Taylor, is there anything else that, I mean, you said some Merlin builds because of Retold Fortune, but like, what else are you eyeing?
There's one more domain that draws a card into memory, and like, that's not exciting because it's just, it literally is just pay to put a domain out, draw a card into memory. But I think it enables some really cool Water Tony stuff. So I'm going to be looking at that soon too.
Yeah.
So like, surprisingly, none of the big splashy like Umbra Assassin cards, like the Tristan cards, a lot of like the Silvie support. There's some really flashy like Ranger stuff going on, and the Astra cards. Like none of those have really like excited me that much, just because like they're part of it is like they're super obvious, like, hey, this is really cool, like these are the big flashy cards of the set. Part of it is too like I haven't been drawn to those archetypes yet, or I have been, and I don't know if like they add too much. Like the Ranger gets some really cool tools, like we'll talk about that later as well. But they kind of just enhance more what Ranger was already doing, and not necessarily, I don't think they like really enable anything new that we haven't seen from them yet. Whereas like I think Retold Fortunes lets Merlin kind of like focus in a little bit more on specific spells it wants to play, and I think it gives like Water Merlin a pretty big shot in the arm. And then like the Domain, I think Domain Tony is like much more of a real deck you can play outside of the really cool fire deck that Jimmy was playing.
Jimmy was just living in Mercurial Heart metagame already, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like he was so far ahead of the curve, and we're finally all get to catch up now. But like I think you can play a lot more cool Domain things without having to go as all in as that deck did, in both Water and in Wind. Actually, I think Wind probably has some cool stuff to do with domains as well, because both of the Wind domains that are in this set are pretty interesting. One like gives you when you imbue your units, they get +1 in power for the turn, which is neat.
Yep.
And I forget what the other one was, but it was also like it was a fairly unique effect that seemed a little, if I'm remembering correctly, it's pretty niche, but could be very powerful in that niche. But both of those just, I think, enable some interesting level 3 strategies that we haven't seen yet from Tony. So that's what I'm looking forward to trying out next. So how about yourself, Dan?
I was just pulling up the other Wind card. Yeah, it's the other Wind domain is Windbless Hurricane Farm. It's at the beginning of your Recollection phase. You may reveal 3 Wind element cards from your memory. If you do, summon a power cell.
Oh yeah, yes, that is good.
Yeah, that is
very powerful.
That's pretty interesting too. We've seen locally, we've seen a couple of people kind of starting to mess around with power cells and automatons, and I'm going to say it's exactly what you and I were saying in the preview review episode, but these power cells are more powerful than they appear on the surface, because those like, actually I'll just swing for 9 turns like are real and real threatening. So that's been pretty cool. I can see that. I can see something potentially kind of coming out of that card too. I have I have the Water Silvie left to experiment. I've iterated on that list a couple of times. I literally just picked up my 3rd Silvie Recollection deck right before this, so that I could build my. I want all 3 Silvies built at the same time. I want to be able. The reason is number one, I can't decide. I don't want to have to keep tearing them apart and swapping the parts out, because I like them all a lot, and I want to be able to just play them on a dime. I also want to be able to offer them to newer players to play, because it's a very good deck, and it's not the hardest. Actually, it's harder than like surface level than it might seem to get the plays, but it's also not the hardest deck in the world to start to perform with. Any Silvie Slime build. So I have the Water one left to build. I think Taylor, you and I were kind of trying to hammer out the last couple changes in the list. It's a very tight list. It's extremely difficult to find where the as Taylor knows, because he kept telling me to cut this card, and I was like, no, it's nope, integral. I can't cut that. Taylor getting really fed up with me.
Dan's like, how do we add dungeon guides to this list? Because that should probably be in here with Scepter. And I was like, well, this card kind of strikes me as something that is not the strongest out of everything here. And he's like, nah, we need that. And okay, well, how about this one? And no, that one you can't. There's no way you can cut that. And okay, so here's this third option. He's like, no, this isn't gonna work.
Nope.
And
Yeah. At
it
this
was
point, just cut the whole deck because it's yeah. I would like. There's no other option. We eventually fit him in. We had I think Kyle chimed in a little bit, and we kind of all settled on I accepted getting rid of one copy each of 3 different cards.
yeah.
To be like, fine, I'll run only 3 of those, whatever. And I'm not going to put the 4th dungeon guide in right now because I can't make room for it. Yeah. So the list is, the list seems really sweet though. So I'm excited to experiment with that one a little bit. I can't do the deck profile on it yet because like I always say, I don't like to just throw up a deck profile without having played it. Number one, I feel like I give the wrong impression in a deck profile that way. And I want people to trust that I have played this deck. I'm not just putting garbage out there. So you don't, otherwise, my fear is in the future, you see a deck profile for main deck. You're like, well, one time I tried other decks and they clearly never even played it. So I'm not going to even click this. Right. So I want to have a reputation I kind of want to hold to. But then number 2, I find that, you can build a deck in practice and come up with all these cool lines, but until you actually get in and play it, there's like a bunch of stuff that you just don't even necessarily recognize sometimes until you have the cards in here. You're like, oh my God, I didn't realize if I do this and then use this card, then that's a sick combo. And or wow, this deck can't win against this deck. I like to be able to at least have a somewhat robust take on what this
is at. You also might find that a lot of cards that you previously thought were uncuttable are actually not really pulling their weight. And then you could probably fit that 4th dungeon guide in there. So
yeah, we'll see about that. We'll see about that, Taylor. So that's in the future. And then less formed. That's one of the next thing we're doing. But I have a water cleric deck that I'm excited to try. I've been having a lot of fun looking at clerics. We didn't talk about it all yet, but clerics got some juice in this set.
Yeah, 100%. All the Astro cards are very impactful, I think.
Yeah, I'm talking specifically Star Calling, Astral Zenith, Arasana, because there are other cleric builds you can build, but I don't know about how other people feel. But there's only one cleric deck I actually want to play, and that's I want to flip cards off the top of my deck and free blast you for 10 or 12 or whatever over and over again. That idea is way too fun to me to try playing any other cleric. I don't care. I just want to make Astral Zenith work.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Some of the automaton builds with Claude are really cool. I think there's a lot of, especially with the Astromech in there that draws you cards when you brew and gathers a bunch of herbs right away. That's really neat. But man, I just want to, what is it? Cosmic Bolt somebody for 19 or whatever you can get it up to these days with Prima Materia and stuff.
You can't get it quite up to 19. Prima Materia is unique, unfortunately. So, but you can get it up to 13, which is pretty cool.
Yes, that's dope. Wait, isn't there? There's one more Astro card that lets you. Oh, it lets you trigger again or something, right?
Oh yeah, you can double cast it.
You double cast it. That's kind of like casting it for 19. So I'm gonna take it.
It's the cleric tools are putting the list together initially was really fun actually because there were a lot of cards where you read it and you go, that's just insane. But there's too many of them. You can't just be there's my 60 card deck. If you did that with 4 of everything, you would have a 100 card deck or something. So you really, it's this deck of just a pile of cards and all of them read the coolest card in the game. And it's just going to then the rest of the deck, the other half of the deck is just how do I get there? How do I, it's a lot I talked about this too with you, but it feels a lot like Rydex where it's these cards are clearly the most insane cards in the game. And then these cards are all just ones that let you get to the insane cards and then combo off. So, and then the last thing I want to mention is just a tease in that I don't know if anything's going to come of it yet, but I've had one slime that has eluded me in how to work with it. And I have begun the initial stages of research and development into, into engineered slime. So,
that's not the slime I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say convoking slime. The
Oh,
one that the Neo slime that makes copies of itself.
Yeah, I just haven't with Convoking Slime. I don't feel like slime builds need what he brings right now.
I agree.
That's
He's
the
like
big
not
issue.
quite powerful enough to hang with the other advanced element slimes. Like they just all overshadow what it does.
They're also instantly impactful, and what Convoking Slime could do is just like win an unwinnable game given like 8 turns or something, right? That's actually more than you need for it to be out of control. But probably like 4 turns is about the tipping point, I would guess.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other slimes are just so immediately impactful. And the slimes all just work so well together that it like, I feel like one thing I've noticed in every slime build is obviously I'd like jam 4 of Storm Slime into every single one because the entire build just, and the Terra package, and I say this in every deck profile, but Gaia's Blessing, it's like these cards are just, they're all just glued together. And I don't have anything I would gain by like putting in Convoking Slime when I just have this other line that just like wins that fast. So it's, yeah, but like, you know, maybe at some point there'll be like in this meta game, you're like, well, the only thing you need to win is to have 144 Convoking Slimes out. Like, okay, well, I can do that. That's doable. So, but yeah, like Engineered Slime, I'm taking a look. That
one is,
it's trickier.
That one's, agreed. I think the payoff is potentially very good though.
It seems so. It seems like that to me. The payoff seems like really, really high, but you have to, it's going to be different than the other slime builds for sure. Very different.
Sweet. Well, yeah, with that, I think let's kind of get into, some of these more in-depth looks at what MRC brought to the table. Before we do that though, Dan, why don't you tell listeners how they can help support the channel?
Oh, you're so good at this now, Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Before we get into some of the in-depth looks at Silvie and Tristan and all some of the other decks we've been just kind of hinting at so far, if you enjoy listening to Recollection Step, if you enjoy Main Deck, if you like want to help us out a little bit, there are 2 super easy ways that you can do that. The first way is you can go ahead and interact with the video here. You can like, comment, you can share it with your friends. You can make a really awkward Facebook post. I know you don't even use Facebook anymore. That's fine. You can just make a post anyway. You don't care about it anymore. If you're not using your Facebook, just go ahead and share the Recollection Step on there, because what do you care? You're not going to log in again ever anyway. You can do all that. Or if you're on one of our podcast platforms, just leave a 5-star review and let other people know that you do consider Recollection Step quality podcast content for your enjoyment. And the other way you can support us too is if you have heard about some really sick decks on Recollection Step and you got to go buy cards right now, you can shop on TCG Player, but don't just shop on tcgplayer.com. Go to our affiliate link, bit.ly/shoptcgs. That's bit.ly/shoptcgs, or click the link in the description down below, and that will let you shop for the lowest market prices for your favorite singles on TCG Player. And also, TCG Player sends a little bit of a kickback over to us, which helps us greatly. Thank you so much for all the ways that you do support us. It means a ton.
Awesome. All right. Yes. So let's get into it. We're going to start with Silvie, because I think if we don't, Dan is going to explode. He won't be able to talk about anything else.
You know what? There was a comment on the last deck profile where someone was saying like they could feel, like, more, I'm paraphrasing, I would say more or less they could feel the excitement every time I talked about a new combo in that Silvie deck. And like, for real, like Taylor knows this is like, since we had this full reveal, and actually slightly before, because we were doing the video for Tristan and I got to look at the Silvie deck then, I've literally just been exploding with excitement every single time we've had the opportunity to talk about Silvie. I had the deck, like I had versions of the deck being built for a while, and I don't know why. I just absolutely adore this deck. I didn't think going into it, like when it was revealed, I thought, oh, that's cool. Like, slimes, neat. But I've glued to it. It stuck to me like a slime, and
I had no idea you were such a Silvie stan until MRC came out, and now it's just your whole world is you're like a completely different person. I don't even know who you are anymore.
You know, I liked Silvie before. You know that. Actually, I played
Yeah.
Silvie decks at locals multiple times.
Yeah. I mean, you are a Sylvie enjoyer, but not like, Sylvie diehard, not a Sylvie ride or die. Like,
Yeah. Well, you get the combination of
yeah.
I like the idea of the deck already. I liked how Silvie I liked the concept of the Silvie deck before. Big payoffs on your big beasts, but you had to build up to it a little bit, right? I thought like cool, cool enough concept. Um Gameplay wise, character wise, she's cute. That's fine. Whatever. Like that's never been actually a huge thing for me. I know for some people it's a major thing. For me personally, I'm more of a gameplay focused person, so I look more at the mechanics and everything. But then you combine that with some extremely pushed cards, making clearly a very competitive deck. And now I'm just excited. And it's a little bit of the underdog syndrome too. I think too. Where like I've been waiting for Sylvie to be good, and now that she's good, I'm not just gonna be like, yeah, I'll go play Merlin. You can do that, Taylor. That's fine. But like, no. It's Sylvie's time. So you can guarantee at these locals until I get off Sylvie to start trying Cleric or whatever. It'll be just, you're going to have at least one Sylvie deck you have to face every week. So you better tech for it.
Yeah. I was expecting more like Sylvie lovers at locals actually, but really it's kind of just been like you so far. We've had like one or two other people play Slimes, but man, the Tristan bandwagon has been really, really hopped on here for our local scene.
I will say that surprised me the most too. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much of it is everyone knows that I'm playing it or something, and they're just like, well, I'll play something else. I don't know if there's any portion of that.
I don't think that's too much of it. I think people were just really hyped about Tristan, which I was not.
Yeah,
I was not expecting.
Big Tristan hype at our locals for sure. Yeah. Every week, multiple Tristan decks.
Yep. Yeah, which is also very cool. But let's dive in a little bit here with Silvie and kind of talk about what makes her good, why she's insane now. For all of that, you can just go look at Dan's deck profiles for the Fire and Wind lists that will be linked. And since he's taking care of that, we'll just move on. We'll talk about why Tristan's good now. No, I'm kidding. We won't do that. There's so many cool things going on with Silvie. As a known Silvie hater, actually, I really appreciate a lot of the very powerful and pushed cards she got in this set. That just like really, really tie the deck together. I've always said that like Silvie's level 2 is the most powerful in the game. But up until Tristan. This set, it was the only level 2 that like let you draw 2 cards. Like it actually like replaced itself, and so it put you ahead compared to every other level 2 in the game. Just by itself. I mean, Lorraine kind of did too as well. If you could get a good cleave off, but like that's the only place where you'd see that kind of card advantage. So now she actually has the tools to like really enable taking advantage of that level 2 and making sure you can get to like your advanced element and play a longer game without, just getting overrun, because she doesn't have to play a bunch of like pride allies that don't listen to her anymore. Cards like, I mean, Baby Gray Slime, I've got to say, is like probably the single most impactful card to making Silvie playable here. It's hard to state how much it ties the deck together. Like, it just does everything that Silvie wants.
It's, it's really interesting, I think, too, because Baby Gray Slime on its face is it's not too different than a Library Witch. It's a combination of a Library Witch and a Clumsy Apprentice. Mm-hmm. It loses the like self damage instead for a sort of a conditional card draw. It's like, as long as you build your deck with certain other cards, then it's like a better Library Witch or a better Clumsy Apprentice. And that, like, on its face shouldn't be as good as it is, I feel like. But there are two things going on here. Number one, we talked earlier about floating memory payoffs like Lost in Thought, which are like, okay, so you're going to jam your deck to make this card good, to get this card to be good. You're going to jam your deck with a bunch of stuff that's sometimes not that great, sometimes kind of mediocre. Well, the payoff for Baby Gray Slime is to jam your deck full of a bunch of cards that are also pushed, like a bunch of cards that are also really good. Mm-hmm. And so that requirement doesn't feel like much of a requirement. I know that on the flip side, I want to mention too, because I think I think we're not too far away from people starting to, if they haven't already, started grumbling about Silvie, because a couple people can just bring Silvie to a locals, and as long as they're competent players, have a decent list, don't run into. Actually, I haven't. I really need you to start bringing Merlin, because I haven't found the real checks to Silvie yet in our
Yep.
locals. I felt pretty unrestrained at our locals. I won the last two locals with that I played Sylvian. I played Nico in one also. I haven't only played Silvie, but but I think it's pretty easy for a couple people to bring Silvie and just kind of like stomp, just kind of like crush a lot of people. And I think the one word of warning that I want to bring about Silvie in particular is that Silvie is very much a focused typal deck, and there shouldn't be an expectation from players that more slimes will get printed at a reasonable rate over time. It's possible. We do have a few more advanced elements to see. I can totally see them like when they do Tekka or one of the other like previously named advanced elements. I could see them. That'd actually be a cool opportunity if Tekka is what I expect it to be, to have like another automaton slime and like work with engineered slime or something. They could do some cool stuff there, right? But we have the three elements. They have their babies. They have their basics. Could they do like elder blue slime? Sure, I guess. Like there's some room, I'm sure. But I think the expectation here is that Sylvie's slime sub side quest is completed, and your future sets are probably going to be doing other things with tamers, other things with even Sylvie in particular, if they want to, rather than just continuing to focus the slime support, which means that whatever you have for your core support for the slime deck right now is probably what we're going to have for a while, for potentially a very long time, until we get like a Yu-Gi-Oh style, like the return of Slime Sovereign like structure deck, and then like featuring new link slimes that you link together and summon, whatever. Like I don't know. The Yu-Gi-Oh nonsense could release, but so these cards, like these slimes, do need to like kind of hold up their end of the bargain long term, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to just print a bunch of slimes that then just get outclassed a little later, because then it's just, well, Sylvie's bad again. Yeah.
Well, I think too, one of her strengths is just like where previously she couldn't play to the board at all. Like now she plays to the board really well. Between like Baby Gray Slime replacing itself and Forest Cakes coming down and actually making it really easy to make really large slimes really early. She has a lot of power to control the board against like the traditional kind of like more ally focused lists and other lists that would just kind of like have some offhand allies. Like a lot of these Tristan decks, actually, the ones at locals, there's been a couple that went straight to like level 3 and just tried to do a bunch of cool Umbra stuff. But the ones that like would play to the board a little bit, I think Silvie had a really good matchup into, because she just has some really big, large monsters. Like it's easier for her to start her turn 2 and make a 3/3 slime, right? Which is going to outclass all of your traditional like 2/3 allies that you see, and a lot of just kind of like the random stuff that other decks will play in the early game. So like she is kind of a menace if you're trying to interact that way, right?
Yeah.
I think actually Merlin might be a pretty good check to Silvie, specifically because she's not playing to the board like that. And the more decks we kind of see just ignore that or find more ways to sidestep that might really be where her weakness lies. But I mean, even if that's the case, like she still has a really strong end game if you decide to just have her rush to 3, right? Like you have things like Ethereal Slime, which with Slime Sovereign, you can play for free on the turn you level up to 3, and it's a 5/5 and draws you a card, and it has it's True Sight and Stealth and a bunch of other garbage, right? Like it's insane. Yeah. So like she has a lot of powerful ways to like kind of interact. So like something like Merlin or Rye that is just going to ignore that could very well just be like, sorry, like you should have brought more spell shields or,
Well,
whatever.
I mean, okay. Yeah, I agree totally. And I do think that there are going to be checks in the metagame and serious play. But, I think right now what we see is, especially in the early development of a metagame, we talk about this in all of our podcasts for all of our games. The metagames tend to start with the most aggressive decks popping off, and then the mid-range decks kind of come in, and then the control decks come in, and that's the cycle. Because the mid-range decks outvalue the aggro decks, the control decks outvalue the mid-range decks because the mid-range deck tries to go later and the control deck beats them there. And then the aggro decks can come back and start beating the control decks because they're going to close the game too fast, right? Mm-hmm. With the Mercurial Heart metagame in particular, one of the things that I noticed, I think based on just it being a supportive set and the Recollection decks that it released with, is I think players immediately gravitated into the mid-range specifically. We've tried some more aggressive, like we've tried Fire Xanders and stuff, and those didn't perform well because everyone's just playing mid-range decks right now. And I'm going to go on record right now and say that when you're talking about mid-range versus mid-range matchups, Silvie, I think, is going to be crowned as the queen of that matchup. I don't think there is a better mid-range deck to face other mid-range decks with than Silvie, for exactly the reasons you're saying. And this is another thing I was going to get at too with the power of Baby Gray Slime, is that it has the animal tag on it, which is such an innocuous tag, but in Tamer specifically, it basically, Tamer was built before with a bunch of support for animals, and then the animals and beasts, both of them, and then the animals and beasts had built-in drawbacks. So it was like it was an ecosystem where you put it the thing with the drawback, but then you superpowered it, and you go, okay, once I break through this drawback, the pride or whatever, then you're gonna get crushed. Enter the slimes who don't have drawbacks, but then just get to reap all of the benefits of that. So you're now your Baby Gray Slime. I mean, if you could play Library Witches as a 2/2, that's like a lot better than Baby Gray Slime. That's a basic Baby Gray Slime play, and then Baby Gray Slime draws you the card on enter as well. It's not susceptible to Dream Fairy losing you the card draw or something. And 2/2 is not even Baby Gray Slime's limit. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's like the lower bound almost. Like
I beat down with a 6/6 Baby Gray Slime in one of these matches. It was against main deck Dustin, who was testing out another Tristan brew, and I beat him after a long game one, a real grind game one. Like he had the shadows, I had the slimes. We just kind of grounded out, but I had Scepter, which we'll talk about in a sec too. The Terror Regalia is insane, but I had I had the Slime Stick or the Verdant Scepter, and was just like, he was on 1 card a turn, and I was on 2+ because of Gaia's Blessing also, and you kind of win that long game that way. Game 2, I was like, I saw my hand, I was playing Wind again, I saw my hand, I'm like, this is going to be a faster game, and just did like green slime shenanigans with Baby Gray Slime. Ended up just like, he ended up having to try and like, he tried to deal with the green slime, I bounced it, I put the counters on Baby Gray Slime, I'm like, now you got a 6/6 to deal with, and then just started bashing his face with it. So it's it can make even the most innocuous slimes extremely threatening, and that's something that not a lot of decks are currently built to deal with, especially if they're building into mid-range game plans, because your allies are just better than their allies. Your value, everything, like you said, everything gains value, which is the mid-range staple. Like, you just want to play a thing and get some value. But everything does that and then gets better than their things. And then your end game is just like, for other mid-range decks, they can't stack up to, I love that I can say this, but they can't stack up to Terra's Regalia. They're way too strong.
I mean, Terra's always had some really strong Regalia cards too. The issue was it was so hard to get to 3, and then at 3, like, have the time to take advantage of that Regalia. Yeah. Just because, like, again, like, you didn't have any board presence, right, to protect yourself from aggro decks or other mid-range decks. And again, like, you just had rough times against like combo decks or control decks too, because like they just went over the top of whatever the heck you were ever going to do, right? But now that you actually get to 3 and you can have enough cards at 3 to like play the game, You can play some of these insanely powerful cards like Gaia's Blessing, which has always been just a bonkers card, right? Like I get to play this Regalia, and I don't have to materialize it even. I can activate it during my main phase, and all of a sudden it potentially just draws me a bunch of cards off the top of my library for free, right? Like that card is busted. Stonesail Band, another like card that is just set up to be very powerful. Cycle away all your crappy cards and look for some sweet advanced element cards. Now you're at 3. Lets you play things at fast speed. Like lets you do a lot of really good things, really crazy things. And then the new one, Slime Stick, right? Verdant Scepter, which is just set up to draw you a bunch of cards over a few turns and also just make your allies really huge. Like there's so many things that Terra can do now that are just going to like really just stomp on a bunch of other mid-range decks that aren't ready to try and like go over the top of it. And really, I don't think many decks can go over the top of it. Like if you thought like Ghost of Pendragon like drew you a bunch of cards right away, like it really doesn't take that much longer, and Terra's drawing many more cards than that.
Yeah, Terra's draw is not as bursty. That's the big thing. I mean, you get one burst with Stonescale Band that requires you to lose some cards, but when you lose it out of memory, it's like it's sort of an advance on that card loss. But they sync together so well. Going Stonescale Band to put slimes in the yard to draw into your advanced element slimes, so then banish the slimes in the graveyard to play the
King Slime, which is another just insane.
Well, to do the King Slime
card.
Or to play the Guy's Blessing. You either one.
Or the Guy's Blessing, yes. Yep. Yeah.
To the point
where
where
a little ahead of us.
Dylan, one of our locals, was just like finally jumping in a little bit, playing a little bit. And I started doing this stuff, and he's like, "You're just playing Yu-Gi-Oh right now." And I was like, "I am, yeah." Tamer's endgame is Yu-Gi-Oh, and I mean that in the best way possible. It is just you have the turn where you're just kind of like moving cards over, and this allows me to play this for free, and then this thing powers up this, and now this does 12 damage to you. Like, yeah, that's how it works. Stonescale Band too. I want to mention, you had mentioned that one of the counters to Silvie, and like in theory, this should be 100% correct, and I think it will be. In general, is that a good control/combo-y deck should be able to go later than Silvie. Like, look, as much as Silvie can put out big 6/6s, Rye can do 70 damage in a turn. Like, you gotta, if he can get a clear shot, he'll obviously take Silvie out. I am impressed though at the amount of interaction Silvie has for that already. The Beastbound Boots are a card I currently am putting in my material deck in every material deck I build in the main board, because I know that if I see Rye, I'm going to need that out. And that is for how big Sylvie's stuff is and how many allies she can put out against Rye. That can be tough to get rid of, like just tough to play around. He kind of just has to try and use our new like reduce to ash or something to deal with it, which he has access to now, which is good. Counterplay to counterplay is always great. But also Stonescale Band, fast speed, Twilight Slime.
Oh yeah.
To give yourself Spell Shroud. I mean, like, that is another thing that Silvie can do, as well as just getting to play Safeguard Amulet, Slime Shield in the Wind build or the Slime build. I mean, it's not just like a done deal matchup either.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's good.
Yes, and we'll just say also quick. We got to move on because we spent so much time on Sylvie. Like I
thought
said,
this is the Slime podcast.
Dan was what? No.
Right,
no.
This is Recollection Slime, the Slime podcast.
No. we can't do that. I can't live with myself if that happens. But Storm Slime is just also insane. Like, it just is going to close so many games out.
Yeah.
And like, that's just another reason why, like, it's just, this deck is so strong. Cause like, even if you can somehow like, get this board under your control or start kind of going over the top of them, Sylvie's just going to like plunk you for like 6 with a Storm Slime and then potentially threaten to do it again. So, she just has so many tools and she's very, very good now. Everybody who's been waiting for her to be playable, like, this is your time. Like get in there and have some fun. Like, you're gonna have a really good time.
Grab any of our deck lists. The fire one's a good budget list. The wind one's a little more expensive. The water is going to be a little more in between, I think. Because the water one takes some other cards from like FTC and and MRC that are some rares and stuff that you may or not have. The fire one is literally just buy the Recollection deck and a bunch of commons and uncommons. Go pick up Gaia's Blessing. If you haven't bought Gaia's Blessing yet, I think it's still $5 for the Ultra Edition one, which is 5 times what it used to be. But go pick it up. That's the best $5 you'll spend in Grand Archive if you're a Silvie fan. You need that card. It needs to be in your material deck.
Yeah, it's insane. It's too good. But yeah, so the cool thing now is Tristan is good now too, which is dope, right? So
yeah,
like Tristan's also very good. I don't know if she's not as obviously strong as Silvie, but she's also, I think, she's got a lot more ways to kind of build the deck too. Whereas Silvie kind of goes pretty hard into the mid-range section. Like Tristan can get a little aggro. She can play a longer mid-range game, I think. She's not going to get as many values, but she has a lot of defensive tools available to her. So she kind of has a little bit more of a wide spectrum for that kind of stuff. And just so many different ways to build her that it's a little tricky to find the best thing to do right now. But I mean, her new level 3 from and her new level, actually all of her new levels are very good cards that do a lot of just exactly what you want to do in pretty much all of her decks. Her level 1 giving agility 3 or a prep counter it'd be probably way too good if it gave both. But the agility 3 actually is really neat because it like lets you play some really aggressive games while still holding up interaction. Or it lets you just hold up a ton of interaction while still like playing to the board a little bit. Agility 3 is just a really powerful mechanic, being able to pick up 3 cards from your memory at the end of the turn. Getting a prep counter starts kind of enabling her level 2 and letting you level up really quickly. Her level 2 actually is probably, her level 2 might be her new level 2, I should say, might be the most powerful level 2 in the game now.
I think it is.
Yeah,
I think it is because the counters are non-interactable, where Silvie's allies are interactable.
Yep. Yeah, but both are level 2s, draw 2 cards like pretty much unconditionally. That's not true. They're both conditional, obviously.
They're both literally conditional. but
they're both like
it's
fairly easy to set up to
you like having one very particular card in your hand to get the like 2 cards, which is like what Lorraine is.
Yep. It's very easy to build your deck and create the situations where you're going to be drawing both cards every single time. And yeah, Tristan's just doesn't, you can't interact with Tristan's at all at the moment currently. So like you just get to go to level 2 for free essentially. And then her level 3, like dropping a couple ominous shadows, having some built-in protection to let players redirect attacks to those shadows. And then also giving another prep counter on enter, like ton of utility there. So like she just has so much flexibility. And then of course like Shadow Strike is maybe like one of the best kill cards in the game too, where if you go to level 3 and have like 4, 5, 6 prep counters, like you just have a like a potentially like a 9 damage plus unblockable attack as soon as you get to level 3. So like they can't do anything about it. They can't taunt it. They can't intercept it. They need to be like on water essentially with a Song of Frost or some other combat ending effect. So it's just, there's a lot of really cool things to do with Tristan at the moment. It takes a little bit more work to find how to enable those cool things.
The thing that I've found with Tristan has been tough to build. Well, I think the decks currently, some of the easiest decks to just do okay with are build it similar to the Recollection deck. Have an ally based engine of some kind. I've seen both sticking with the automatons be successful. In fact, leaning into the automatons, we had one of our main deck, Tony, was testing power cells and stuff in there and was definitely, doing well with it.
Yep.
Whereas Dustin was going to humans instead of automatons, using Korhazi Outlook, and just like relying on reclaiming Outlook to get, as an extra source of prep counters and stuff like that. And both players were seeing some success with those variants. But outside of that, it's been really tough to hammer in like what the most valuable route to take is. I know I've toyed around with the idea of a water build as well that played a significantly different Umbra endgame. But I think there's some benefits and some ideas there, but that's really a control deck, and control decks are reliant on you knowing what to control for typically, and slotting in correctly. And I'm also not certain I found a build that I would like more than going into Water Luxem right now. And you still get all the assassin class bonuses there, but this is kind of the interesting thing that Tristan's starting to open up and show us, because we haven't had a lot of classes. Well, this is the first time we've had a full line for another a full line in the same class as another full line. So we had Xander 1 through 3 with 2 different level 3s. We have Tristan 1 through 3 with 2 different level 3s and 2 different level 2s for both of them.
They both have 2 different level 2s,
actually. Yeah. So that's yep. And we're going to start as we see Grand Archive continue to unfold, more of these sets come out. We'll start encountering this more often, and it'll become an interesting puzzle. Whether like, do players like a particular play style? Like, do you prefer the preparation counter focused play style of Tristan versus the whatever Xander's doing? Luxem flashlight in your face effects or whatever. Or is it that there is a particular meta relevance to choosing one route or the other that makes makes one more powerful than the other in certain circumstances? But we'll kind of see where I think Tristan's is tougher, and we're going to see where it shakes out over time. I know that, like you mentioned, Taylor, our locals aren't going to stop building Tristan decks. I'm sure. I expect to face it every single week as people continue to try and refine lists and hone in on what works best.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see too. Like, Wind, I think, is right now the most obvious. Like, hey, build Tristan and Wind, just because of all the new prep counter generation in Wind from her Recollection deck. And like, building Fire or Water is a little bit more difficult, just because, like, I don't think you're going to always be able to get the draw 2 on her level 2 as reliably. But I think there's also just really good reasons to be in Fire or Water, depending on what your deck is trying to do, especially like Water, right? Like, you've got a lot of like really good controlling options in Water for Assassin, especially like Shroud and Mist is a really good card that's going to give you your champion and all your units stealth. So like you have a lot of really good options there. You just got to kind of figure some things out. And then, of course, like, they all play Incapacitate really, really well, which is the new 4 reserve fast speed counter target non-attack action card, or just non-attack
counter target action card. Cerulean Decree is the one that's non-attack.
Yes, non-attack. Yeah, counter target action card activation. And then with class bonus, it costs 2 less. So like for Tristan and Xander, it costs just 2, which is really, really, really powerful.
Those decks, so I think getting to play Incapacitate, Frostbind, and Cerulean Decree if they want to is like, it's pretty cool.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, and then like, there's some weird curse things you can do. Like, Debilitating Grasp is potentially kind of interesting. Revenant Scourge also like lets you like kind of enable your Ominous Shadows turn after turn to kind of like slowly whittle down life total that way. So like, there's some powerful plays there for sure that need to be explored, that just we haven't really looked at nearly as much as Dan has Silvie yet. So I'm just not quite sure what needs to be done yet, but there's so many cool things you could do. Like, a lot of these Umbra cards are pretty wild. So I expect to see a lot of different Tristan builds over the next couple months, in all 3 elements, just trying different things. And I wouldn't be surprised if like there were successful builds in 2 or 3 elements. So
yeah, for sure. I think like the big thing is just, I think that a lot of decks are trying to work around is prep counter access. Is the main thing, where Wind just has more straightforward, powerful options than the others necessarily do, but the other ones aren't devoid of it either. And yeah, we'll see what people come up with.
Yes. Yep. Also the Obliviate is really cool now. So all those sweet level 2 champions that they introduced in ALC that had basic elements enabled on them.
In case people weren't aware, that's the name of in the lore. The Obliviate is the name of the organization run by, I think Vanitas is the one in charge of it.
Vanitas is the one in charge of it. So yeah, the Recollection step is we're not just all gameplay focused here. We are lore nerds. We'll get these names correct. Don't worry. But yeah, they actually are I think very playable now. I don't know if they're going to be tier 1 necessarily, but there's builds for both Nico and Polcock. And there's probably a Vanitas deck or two out there as well that are good, and are going to like, you can have a lot of fun with that locals and take down some locals, and you might be winning some store champs with them or taking them to a regional or something. Like,
I still have a suspicion.
There's a lot of power here.
I have a suspicion about Vanitas, and I have not been able to really look at it closely because there have been slimes in my eyes. But at some point here, I'm definitely diving into some Vanitas builds because I just feel like there's too many advantages to Vanitas to ignore now. Too many cards that are just like, that's a pretty powerful combo to play. Yeah, I think it's there. As far as Nico and Polcock, stay tuned because we will have some profiles coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, we'll spoil those profiles because I think we want to talk about them a little bit here.
Yeah,
but yeah, like talking about Vanitas, right? Like his inherent attack or his inherent power stat on his level 2 is still really unique and actually still very good. He's got some really good cards now that he can take advantage of in Vainglory Retribution to kind of like redirect attacks more or less, where he prevents some damage and then adds it to his attack next turn. What's it called? Like I always mess up this name up. Diablerie. Thank you. Diablerie lets you like just steal people's divine relics, and it has floating memory. So like, that can be just a huge tempo gain for you and really put you ahead on cards as well. Like that's a really powerful play to take somebody's GCR or Grail or Temporal Spectrometer. So yeah, there's definitely some power there for sure. But Water Nico is one we've been looking at as well. That's really cool.
Both of us have played this deck at locals.
Yep.
It's a very fun deck.
It's very fun. It's very powerful. It has some like fairly obvious weaknesses in that if you can like stop the attack or redirect her attacks really easily, like Nico's going to struggle. But I mean, it probably has some of the best water set up in the game right now. Like being able to throw down an Icebound Slam and fill your graveyard with floating memory starting on turn 1 is bonkers. So you don't even need to hit for 8 with it. Like hitting it for 3 and just putting like 2 or 3 floating memory in your graveyard on turn 1 is an insane play.
Yeah.
She plays Lost in Thought probably like the best out of any of the water decks I've played so far, just because of how well she fills her graveyard up. And then you have like instant kills with Ravaging Finale, assuming you've been able to put enough pressure on your opponent throughout the game. So just really a lot of powerful stuff going on there.
Has that unique advantage too of being able to play Serene Spirit yes. of Serene Water. I always call them Serene Spirit of Water. It's Spirit of Serene Water.
Yep.
But gets to play that for the extra 6 health and the Glib 6, and doesn't actually lose anything when you lineage release it, because once she's level 2, she unlocks water herself.
Yep.
That's sick.
That's a really powerful play into some of these aggressive decks like Silvie that can be really aggressive and just hit you for a lot, like Silvie, where you might need that extra buffer.
Yeah.
And like, Fire Xander, any of those like ally decks, like that gives you just the extra time you need to get that last Icebound Slam into Ravaging Finale. So
yeah, I would say like actually this would be a great deck if you're expecting to play a lot of like Fire Xander and stuff, because those decks, number one, aren't going to be doing anything to block your attacks. Yep. And then you get to go to level 2 fairly efficiently, like pretty fast. And at your level 2 is 31 health, which is not something that a lot of other decks are going to have that advantage with no loss of resources.
Yep. And like, she'll just destroy Rai. Like Rai really needs to find the peaceful reunions. Otherwise Rai's going to have a really bad time.
I can attest to having done that. Yes. The peaceful reunions were not found, and it was not a very fair fight.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that deck is a lot of fun to play. Definitely something to like be experimenting with. Make sure you're playing Snow Fairies to tap down really annoying interceptors and taunters, but otherwise like Nico's really cool.
Yep.
Polcock is also like pretty baller. We came up with a water Polcock list that we played that first week, and that deck is sweet. him granting -1 cost on all your ranger reactions is really, really powerful when you get to play things like Desperate Dive and Tactical Retreat. And
Yeah.
um,
Those cards are
I think there was
good.
one
Holy
other-
cow, Desperate Dive is good.
Yeah, Desperate Dive is insane. Let me find this art list actually, because it was really cool. There was one other like reaction I thought we had in there that was really powerful.
We are just to be clear too.
Oh, and then
Oh no, go ahead.
Calamity Cannon. That is the other reaction that is insane with him.
Yes, Calamity Cannon. That's what I was going to say. This is a fire. It's a water Polcock, which is the only playing one fire card, which is 4 of Calamity Cannon. Because I mean, Taylor, you can attest to it more because you had played this deck more. But I think a lot of people are worried, like it's very telegraphed. But how do you feel about Calamity Cannon?
No, I mean it's telegraphed, but like you have to have some pretty specific answers to it. Like fire really doesn't have any answers to it. Like, what are they going to resolute stand your +10 power gun attack?
Got him. -3.
Like,
I take 3 less, baby.
Yeah. Like, are they gonna try and like spurn dash your gun? Like, well, okay, I'll lineage release and get my gun on my turn, and then you can't do anything about it. Like you have a lot of ways to play around whatever their interaction is, right? Like
Blast shot bump for blockers too. That's a big one. Is that they can have 10 taunters out. Blast shot bump will do 10 to one of them, or whatever, 13 or whatever it is to one of them, and then the rest to face.
Yep. And then like Penetrator round stops damage prevention anyway. So like Veiling Breeze is not going to do much. The things you're really worried about like are Zephyr, like before you can attack with your gun, or like a Song of Frost, like something like. But those are 2 pretty specific cards that likely were used kind of earlier in the matchup as well, because this deck also plays Dahlia really well. It has a lot of ways to it has a lot of distant enablers, and it gets to play all these sweet new self-mill water cards like Primordial Ritual. And I think there was Dahlia herself mills cards.
Yep, she sure does.
You just get to play like a really large water graveyard, and then Dahlia hits for a lot on her own.
Freezing round too.
Freezing round as well, and Loaded Thoughts is also milling a bunch of cards. Like Ranger actually probably plays this. I just said Nico plays like the best Lost in Thought game, but Water Polcock, Water Ranger specifically really plays a good Lost in Thought game as well.
I'm sorry, I mixed it up. Cascading round is the mill one. Freezing round is the Chilling Touch one.
Yes.
But,
yep.
Well, either way, whatever.
Round. But
freezing round still a memory card for the mill, so it's
yes. Yep. You're filling up your graveyard incredibly quickly with water cards. That's going to increase Dahlia's power. And then of course, because you're playing all this self mill and floating memory, your cards like Frostborn Paladin and Crystalline Archer are also like attacking for a ton. So it's just like it's a really synergistic aggro deck actually that attacks for large values very quickly, and ends the game with a Calamity Cannon for 10, +10 power. So it's it's definitely not a meme. Like it's something you have to respect, and it's going to be really easy to get got out, especially if you're playing fire decks by Calamity Cannon. Like I'm expecting a lot of people to be playing Fire Merlin, and they're going to get to 20 life or something. Like they've got 20 damage counters on. They play their Spirit. They're like, all right, that's good. I'm safe. Spirit's even going to help me take half damage from a Calamity Cannon attack, but like a Blast Shot Pump plus Calamity Cannon plus Cascading Round plus Distant on Polcock for range 2, right? That's 15 damage. So if you're at 21, you're dead even with Majestic Spirit out. If you're at 20, you still got a little bit of life to play with, but there's other ways to take that out. And then of course your Spirit dies anyway in that attack. So like you're not really safe. And so there's just going to be a lot of decks that are kind of used to getting to stabilize at a certain life total and not actually stabilizing.
Yeah.
So
I think
it's going to take a lot of people by surprise.
I'm excited to post that profile because it's I think the least expected of the profiles that we've had. And it was, I don't think we went into MRC Taylor saying, oh yeah, we're going to build Polcock. And then like,
oh yeah,
in one of our earlier deck building sessions, like one of the first ones, actually, we were like, hang on, what if this is a Polcock deck? And then we both kind of got cooking a little bit and like, this is actually really sick.
Yeah. We started with a water list because we're like, okay, well, Dahlia is really good now with all the self mill. And then, well, why are you making your Dahlia's worth with all these Umbra cards. Just play Polcock.
Just play Polcock. Yeah,
Yep.
it's pretty sick. I don't. Do we?
Yeah.
We'll talk about the list in a little bit. We're maybe gonna refine it a little more, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping to have that one up next week for sure. Water Nico will be up next week, and then hopefully having the Polcock up. I want to do 2 profiles next week if possible, just because there are too many MRC decks. This is
there's so many sweet things to look at here. Yeah, like we said, there's just like the format is just blowing up right now. It's you can play a lot of different decks and have a lot of success, especially if like you find the right field and people aren't expecting it.
I want to hit one thing that I think you're just starting to get at this as we're rounding this out. We have I think we have one more thing to talk about, but I want to insert this in. You said you kind of mentioned that people playing fire decks aren't going to, be able to do a lot about this. And we said that earlier about Nico as well. And I don't know if I said it specifically, but I feel that way about slimes as well, because if you can't interact with Storm Slime, it's just going to kill you. Right. So Taylor, how do you feel about the statement that in the set 4 metagame, fire is at its weakest point in the game so far? How do you feel about that? I just threw that out there. I don't even know if I believe it yet, but how do you feel about it?
The statement is it's at its weakest point.
Yep. So far in the game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's I don't think that's a very hot take actually. I think like there's been so many defensive tools added over the last 2 sets, that it really takes away a lot of like Fire's punch. It's a lot harder for decks like Fire Xander to get a quick kill in, or Fire Lorraine as well, to really just kind of like get there. And then like it's still really easy to respect a lot of those powerful plays from those decks with a Nullifying Lantern and really slow them down. There's just so many tools against those decks, and then it's a lot easier for other decks to kill really quickly too. Like it's like they're not killing, in raw speed, but like as soon as they get the game established, like it doesn't take long for them, or controlling the game established, it doesn't take long for those decks to actually close the door.
Yeah. I mean, we
like
talked about these water decks. Nico, that's just doing 8 damage, 9 damage, you lose. Like even if you have enough health, you're now milled out or whatever from Ravishing Finale. We talk about Polcock that just like does, whoops, my Dahlia is swinging for 7 and now I'm attacking you for 15 blast shot pump unpreventable damage or whatever. Like, these decks, and then slimes which are like, whoops, on enter, take 11 and then swing for 5 more. That cost me 0 cards to do. That cost me no cards in hand. I played the Storm Slime for free. It's like, yeah.
Well, and as soon as Tristan gets to 3 prep counters, a Slice and Dice is 9 damage plus 2 times whatever the power of whatever weapon you have out is. Like, it's like all these decks can just close the door as soon as there's an opening, right? I think Fire is going to have to like really kind of evaluate how they need to attack the metagame. I think your Fire Merlins are still going to be like decent because you go to level 3, you play a little bit of defense, and then you also have good ways to finish things out with fireballs at your high, with all your level counters you've accumulated. It's going to be these more like low to the ground, I think, fire decks that are going to struggle a little bit in the meantime, where they don't necessarily go to level 3 and they don't necessarily have a game plan other than just like burn all my cards trying to kill you right away.
Merlin having access to, like, in sort of inherent in her kit, the Incarnate Majesty, Majestic Spirit thing, gives her a level of defense that a lot of other fire decks just don't have access to. Even in Worlds, we saw the Rye decks running around were almost universally main decking for Spell Shield Arcane, because they knew that they had to respect whatever else was going to come their way. Like, you can't not have the access to that. And I mean, I think you're spot on. I think what I'm really getting at is that a lot of our previous top cuts, we've had a number of top cuts that were fire dominated. Never completely fire, which has been cool. There's at least been other decks, but even in Worlds, there was 1 wind, 1 water. A lot of fire. Now the Worlds the championship metagame was highly tweaked towards not drawing ever, because draws were double losses.
Yep.
So there was an incentive to close the door on games. But
it was also it was really a small tournament too, like with 16 players, and all these players have had tendencies, like they've had decks they've wanted to play in the past. It was, you had targets to metagame for too. Like, it's not like it was a big open tournament where you didn't know where you're going to be playing.
Yeah. So, but despite that, I think we have seen fire has been, and many players have said fire is the best element. Fire is the best element. And fire's raw advantage is still its strength for sure. But I really feel like the other elements, and especially the way some of these advanced elements have developed, really it's like the efficiency at which these other elements are able to get to those advanced elements and start to play the game. And then the power level that we've seen apply to, like Terra now is a real thing, and all of Silvie's advanced slimes that she gets to play are going to keep up. Umbra has multiple routes of tools for 2 different classes. That's all quite powerful. Luxem exists still and is still like the inevitable deck that will just win the game over time. I think you're still going to see fire get played as a way to get to those advanced elements and have a bunch of cards in it. Like Luxem will still love fire as an option. Merlin will still love fire as an option. But it really does feel like if we're going late game now, the other elements have ways to, as we said earlier, like you don't build that advantage right away, but you build into it, and then you get some other advantages from playing into those other elements now that it doesn't feel like fire is the only option to play proactively. And if you need to be reactive, you really have to be playing into a particular class to prefer fire over the other ones.
Yes. I do think fire is still the most proactive deck. It has the most ways to launch itself forward. The thing about water, and even not as much water, mostly wind, is wind really needs the opponent to want to interact with it in order to accrue a lot of its advantages. If you're just ignoring whatever the wind player is doing, the wind player is really, really upset.
That's true.
So I think if you are a fire diehard and you're trying to figure out what to play, because a lot of your fire aggro decks just don't feel like they're performing at the moment, I actually think fire Lorraine and Soul is really good right now into some of these decks. It goes to 3 right away, and then it has ways to play a strong late game as well, beyond kind of what we've seen in the past. So and Soul's still a really powerful play, and there's going to be enough decks that just are not able to deal with it effectively. Resolute Stand is kind of at its lowest point in a while too. Many people I think are foregoing that for some more specialized answers too. So you don't really have to worry about that as much. It's obviously still something you need to be careful of. But it's just that's the main answer to Insole. So if you really want to play some fire, that might be something to take a look at in the meantime.
The main answer to Insole is actually a Starday.
That is a really good answer, yeah. But then you also have to be playing cleric. So
then you're having a good time. then we're loving life at that point. So I love that I have actually have played a Starday in response to Insole, and I particularly liked looking at your face when that happened.
Yeah, it was a bummer, but I still won that game, so it was fine.
Well, yeah, but now.
Now I might not win that game.
I might be able to
MRC. MRSA actually I think makes some of that stuff more powerful as well. So, Anyway, so fire players don't be discouraged. There's plenty of game left to play. But I think we just want to finish up here with kind of going into the new sideboard rules that came into effect with the release of MRC. I think actually these are pretty insane. It really changes up how you build your decks compared to what it was previously. So in best of 3 tournaments, previously you could bring a sideboard that had 8 cards, and it was any 8 cards as long as you were still following the same one of Regalia and 4 of main deck card limits. So you could have 4 creative shocks, but only 2 in your sideboard if you had 2 in main board. And you could only have 1 Quicksilver Grail between your sideboard and your material deck. So now that's been updated. You can have 15 cards total, but material deck cards are worth more. They have a higher weight as to how many you can have. Basically, each main deck card is worth 1 slot, and each material deck card is worth 3 slots. So you can have 12 main deck cards and 1 material deck card, but you can't have 12 main deck cards and 2 material deck cards because now you're over the 15 slot limit. So previously, kind of, you have 8 material deck cards if you wanted to. You're now maxed out at 5 because each one being worth 3. 5 times 3 is 15. That's your 15 slots. So your material decks or your sideboards are a little bit more like, or your material decks are a little bit less flexible now. You can't like really just change all that up. This really, I think, affects ally decks specifically, where previously they'd play like all 3 resonance baubles in their main board in their material deck, and then swap the 2 out for other material deck cards depending on what the matchup was out of their sideboard. That's a lot more difficult to do now if you also want to have like some impactful main deck cards, which MRC introduced a ton of.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of like really good sideboard answers now. Yeah, I mean, that's just the big high level of it. It's one thing I found is that it's been really nice for trying to actually like customize your main deck more for different matchups. Like that's the one thing I've always struggled with. Usually like material decks, depending on the deck, you have a lot of slots to work with already in the material deck without the sideboard. So you don't really need to sideboard your material deck cards as much, but only having eight slots then for main deck cards in your sideboard is rough. So being able to switch that up, especially like out of water and wind decks that want specific answers, has been really, really nice.
Yeah, I have enjoyed the new sideboard rules so far. I have felt my sideboards haven't actually been massively larger overall, but I'm reaching, like, let's see, to 10, 11 card sideboards. I think I've done fairly often, 9 mainboard cards and then 2 material deck cards. And that's been kind of enough to feel like I can actually put in like, I have like 3 different sets of 3-ofs.
No.
And kind of plan these swaps a little more accordingly. Like I've had like, I'm going to put in my 4th copy of this, my 4th copy of this, and then 4 of this thing, and then 3 of this thing or something. And like that has felt like enough to really feel like I can go into a match and be like, yeah, I have answers. I have things that I can use to tweak this in order to have a little more play against some of these other decks, as well as still being able to keep a couple of like material deck options, because as we like to say too, the material deck materialized phase is your most important phase of the game, I think. And so I think the change makes sense from that angle too, because given how important the material deck is, if more good material deck cards keep getting printed, eventually these sideboards using the old rule will just largely become like, well, I'm going to put in the 8 cards that I guarantee I can see every single game against the opponent, because if I put them in my material deck, I can just pull them out whenever I want to. And this really, I think, puts the proper weight on those cards that I think was missing before. So now if you're going to do the ally triple bobble thing, there's a cost. There's a real cost to doing that. Allies kind of have it rough right now, I would say, the meta.
I think, I mean, with the sideboard change, I think our allies have a really rough matchup into Silvie, especially, which is really popular at the moment. And I think there's just a lot of these new automatons. Like there's some really aggressive builds I don't think we've really looked at quite yet.
Yeah.
But like a lot of Tristan builds seem like they handle allies very well too. So yeah, it feels a little rough. I think given a few weeks that might change, especially as people get to kind of dive into the new set more.
Yeah,
I think there's going to be a really powerful Wind Warrior Allies build with the Dronica, which is kind of doing the same thing like Baby Green Slime gets to do in Silvie, which has just come out as a 3/3 right away, which is really, like, just bonkers. And then they still get to play like kind of all the Zephyrs and Dream Fairies and stuff. So like there'll be I think there's still some light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just going to take a little bit more time to figure out exactly how to build them, or like, what the focus needs to shift to, because power cells too are like they're a really aggressive mechanic, and they need allies obviously to pay off for the aggression anyway. So we're not going to see the same like 2-3 piles that we saw in the last season.
I agree. And, I also think that's probably good, because like we've had a few tournaments where just whatever 2-3 pile plus whatever random champ they decided to run that day was what won. There were large, and not just one. We've had like, even at nationals, a number of the top cut decks were just variants, different versions. That was cool. There were different versions, but different versions of 2-3 allies deck.
Yep.
And I think there's a place for that for sure. I don't think that place is like 5/8 of top 8 necessarily,
Yeah.
So,
well, and like, yeah, it's nice that it's not just the default kind of go-to aggro deck as well now.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's nice to have that option, but it just it feels like it's not quite really. It just doesn't. To me, it doesn't feel like it brings out everything Grand Archive can be.
Yeah.
As cool as it is, to see like that deck function, like the consistency of the deck is really neat. But it just isn't. Yeah. Like, you don't get to showcase the advanced elements and the leveling mechanic that like other aggressive decks can. So
they usually don't play much into their champion. Like look at the Lorraine deck that just goes, well, I will be at level 0 as long as I feel like, and I'll go to Lorraine someday, maybe. Those decks they don't use class bonus very much. They rarely use much advanced element, just like the Lorraine one with dispersion is the one that like tends to do that. Occasionally seen Tony ones that'll put in the 3, but it's mostly there just to trigger Scepter of Lumina.
Yep.
So they're kind of just playing this like raw numbers game that doesn't feel as much like a game of Grand Archive, the best Grand Archive you can play, as much as it is like, this is the most efficient stat block that I can put out, and I will put out as many of them as possible until I win.
Yeah. Well, and like Silidar has said that, who is the lead designer of Grand Archive, he said that it's kind of like Grand Archive is supposed to be a little bit like a draw 2 game, but it's not technically a draw 2 game. But like your material deck is kind of where your second draw of the turn comes from. For allies decks, it was always literally the second draw of the turn, because they would have Grand Crusader's Ring for a draw. They'd have the appropriate Resonance Bauble for a draw. They now have Backup Charger for another draw. And so like the game with allies was essentially just like getting, outlasting all of their draw 2s. And then when they had to draw one card a turn, like that's when you could really start to turn the game around for yourself. And so now that they're, like having to actually play with the materialization phase more than just drawing an extra card is, I think, going to make those decks a lot more interesting.
Well, I think a lot of them will still choose to draw 2. It's just that they just won't have the sideboard slots necessarily to like really be able to swap out into like the more optimized game plan where they get to get rid of the other baubles and put them in and put different cards in that are like playable. Which really just means that, like you said, it'll be like it is outlasting that. If you live through all of that nonsense, they get to a point where your materialized phases are like Verdant Scepter and Covenant of Thorns, whatever Terra nonsense. It's still a Slimecast, so you can't get away from it. But then theirs are like, I guess I just won't materialize because I can put out Water Resonance Bauble, but it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think these changes are fantastic. I'm very excited to be brewing with these new sideboard rules. So yeah. But I think that kind of wraps up everything we had for this week, Dan. Any kind of final thoughts as we close out?
There's only one thing on my mind, Taylor. And it's
okay, never mind. I take it back. I didn't ask. I'm sorry. All right. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in again this week. We'll be back in another 2 weeks. I'm not sure what we'll talk about yet, but I'm sure there's going to be really cool either MRC shenanigans. We should start seeing some kind of tournaments coming up. Start checking out some results. We might deep dive into kind of maybe like how this game compares to kind of other like anime games. I don't know. We'll come up with some really cool.
We can talk about slimes.
Cool topic. We will not be talking. Well, we will talk a little bit about.
We will talk about slimes. Don't worry, audience. Don't go away. Slimes are coming back. They're not off the menu yet.
But it will not be the Slimecast. But as always, feel free to leave some comments with questions with the hashtag mailbag if you want us to kind of answer those on air as well. And we will be compiling those and keeping an eye on those to answer during future episodes too.
Hashtag mailbag. Which slime is best? You know what? I would answer now, but that sounds like a fun discussion. So go ahead and ask that below. We'll answer that.
Actually, yeah, just leave a comment with your favorite slime or your favorite MRC card and let us know kind of what you guys are doing with the format and the new set. So, but yeah, until then, this is it for me and for Dan. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Slime you later.
That was horrible. It was so bad.
No, it's so good.